Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is time to clear your throat. Yeah, it's time for another show. It's Monday, January 8th, 2018. The president is a stable genius, and he can read. I just thought I would let you know right off the bat that that's true, just to reassure you in case, I don't know, we were the leaders of the free world or the world's largest economy or anything like that. Didn't want anybody to get panicky that we had a president who wasn't a stable genius or able to read. The president reconfirming that of late and sending out surrogates to make sure that everybody knows that he can read. Daily Coast Radio is live now. We're going to read too. Kagro X and Greg Dworkin, Dem from Connecticut, on Twitter. Of course, Bill is reminding us we will drop an unbelievable bombshell, so get ready for it. Let me go find out what it is. Trump didn't golf over the weekend. That is true. That is a huge bombshell. And, he spent the weekend at Camp David. Of course, I did notice that he insisted on horrible operational security. I noticed, I think Tom Matzey was tweeting. He made sure to tweet to everybody exactly what time he was leaving Camp David by helicopter. And then people who live in the flight path, as I do, were able to then essentially just time the flight. And when you saw the gigantic helicopters flying over the head, you were pretty sure that was the President of the United States, since he had just tweeted, "It's me." I don't have Stinger missiles. I have no plans to acquire Stinger missiles. I hope none of my neighbors are. But I will note that they did just arrest somebody for allegedly wanting to join ISIS somewhere in my vicinity. Now, ISIS is typically not found in my vicinity. They would have had to leave to join ISIS elsewhere. But I also don't think that I've never seen, for instance, at Lowe's or Home Depot, Stinger missiles or any other shoulder-launched, easily portable missiles that you could use for the task of firing on the helicopters of the president. When he tweets, "Here I come, everybody take a shot at me." So I think he's still relatively safe. Plus, also, I think those things are probably harder to operate than you might think, but it's just probably not good operational security practice to say I'm getting into a giant helicopter, easily identifiable from the ground, flying relatively low over populated areas, signed the President of the United States, who's a hated dictator, essentially. And I would say it's unwise. I'm going to advise him to stop doing that. Not sure whether he's listening to me. I doubt whether he's into podcasts, although you don't have to read to be able to follow along with the podcast. Just a friendly warning. At the very least, it's not that I'm without self-interest in this. I'm against murder for the most part, let's say that. And that would be bad, even though Donald Trump is a gigantic jerk. You don't just run around murdering them. And two, debris could rain down in my neighborhood. So that would also be bad. That's a close second to that. Unless, of course, it falls on me, in which case it's a serious first. Anyway, we ought to be ready to go with the show at this point, but, as you know, we're not, because we don't prepare for things like this. Greg Dworkin does, though, and he is already ready and raring to go. He's got a raft of stories to go over with you, as usual, and so I'll leave those for him to round up, but those were the major stories of the weekend. He didn't golf. He went to Camp David. He was a little mixed up, I think, about who he was meeting with and why. And he was, of course, preoccupied with fire and fury all weekend and tweeting such life-affirming notes to the rest of us as, "I am very stable, I am a genius, I'm really smart, I went to good colleges, etc., etc." I didn't really read it closely. I'm getting away from that habit. And I read these things through others. Just as I watched the Golden Globes through others, there was no chance I was going to sit down and watch the Golden Globes. Not really my area of interest anyway, but all the good stuff that people talk about happens during the period during which I'm busily getting ready for school the next day and sending the kids off to bed and making sure they shower and get ready and go to sleep on time. They never do. But it causes me to miss most primetime television programming anyway. And they're home from school today anyhow. It made no difference whatsoever. Rather amazing that would be true. We haven't had any precipitation yet, but I guess there's some due in the afternoon. So they said, water could fall from the sky this afternoon, so why don't you take the day off? I wish I had it like that. Good morning, Greg. How are you doing?
Good morning. We're doing very well. It's spring here in Connecticut. We're
Excellent.
At 19 degrees.
Yeah, we have a balmy 15.
Yeah, but that's way better than the -9 it was the other day.
Right. Minus is bad. That's what we're finding out.
And, I don't know what the exact correct term is, but I'm pretty sure it's not a shoulder-fired missile or whatever it is you used.
Oh.
So, therefore, you're not qualified to discuss it anymore.
Well, that's good. I didn't want to really get into
I'm giving you a reason why you don't have to go back to it.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's just, now I have to go find out what the terminology is so that I can tell people that you shouldn't have them, and they'll argue that they should, and then someone will have one, and they'll say, how did that happen? That's a horrible thing.
I was spending the weekend, and actually somewhat this morning, tweeting and sending through Skype, David, all these pictures that I had either made or collected. Of course, we have my Mr. Ed series. Obviously, if he's going to talk about stable geniuses, everybody in the world was tweeting Mr. Ed.
Yes.
But I photoshopped a little bit of Mr. Ed actually reading Fire and Fury with his glasses on. And then there's another one at the bottom there with Wilbur holding up the headline of the old Los Angeles Mirror, which doesn't exist anymore. With Mr. Ed looking over his shoulder with the glasses on. And the headline says, Stable Genius is the new thing.
Yeah, I saw a photo with Kim Jong-un reading the book and laughing. I mean, I think a Photoshop, but
everybody
it was fun.
The other picture that I sent, which isn't a Photoshop, it's an actual Daily News headline today, which says Sloppy Steve cucks himself.
I don't think they can say that.
That's C-U-C-K-S, as in cuckservative.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
Ex-White House big sorry for trashing stable genius Trump and his treasonous son. That's actually a pretty interesting headline there, just in and of itself.
Yeah, right. And so I think he played the weekend thing was Steve Bannon was attempting to sort of kind of apologize, and no one's sure
really
why.
Apologize.
And it wouldn't work.
I wasn't
anyway.
really talking about Don Jr. I was talking about Paul Manafort. But, what the hell? They're all Fredo.
Yeah, at this point, whatever.
Even Daddy Trump is Fredo. They're all Fredo.
it's a Fredo
I have that
family.
picture, too, by the way.
Do you? Of all Fredos?
Yeah, I had made that some time ago.
Well, I'll have to find that one, pull that one out.
Well, I'll find it. I mean,
okay. Well, you don't have to do it right now if you don't want to.
Oh, no, I do.
Okay.
But,
by all means.
But anyway.
I'll write a tell-all book about you and distract you for the week.
Right, exactly. The whole thing about what happened over the weekend was first dominated by the book itself. There's my picture there. It's Don Jr. and Eric
okay.
Standing around just call me Fredo. No, I'm Fredo. We're all Fredo. But Tiffany's staying out of it.
Yes.
The whole idea here is that Michael Wolff, who is what is called in the trade an access journalist, basically a gossip columnist.
True.
And I grew up in New York City reading the tabloids and the gossip columnists, all of them, from Hedda Hopper on. So that sort of access journalism is you're nice, you have lunch, you invite them to parties, and then you sort of listen to other people's conversations, and then you sort of write down what's going on. And the whole point there is that there's no such thing as on the record, off the record. If you're with a gossip columnist, everybody knows everything is on the record.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they even had a Harry Potter character modeled after the gossip columnists.
Yes. I mean, so that's how the whole thing works. And so everybody knows Michael Wolff was, and what I was trying to figure out over the weekend is...
I'll figure it out for you.
Why were the beat reporters so angry with this guy?
Oh, yeah.
He publishes his book. It doesn't tell you anything you didn't already know, except that, on the one hand, it's information from people who work with him as opposed to political opponents or neutral observers.
Yes.
Who think he's an idiot. And the other is that his reaction to it makes it a 10-day story.
Yes, and they don't get that. They only get one day where they say, you're a terrible journalist, right to their face in the briefing room.
Mm-hmm.
So, not nearly as much attention. When they write books, they'll get a little more attention. But this was
So people have been accusing Maggie Haberman and other people of the beat reporter variety of, oh, well, you're just an access journalist. Now a real access journalism comes along, and he writes this bombshell of a book, which is a bestseller. It was flying off the shelves, even in Trump country.
Yeah. That's
true. There were over and over. There were these reports of bookstores. It's on sale at midnight. It's gone by 12:20.
Oh, yeah?
We bought 75 copies. They're out. So it's being talked about. It's on the news shows and so on and so forth. The White House is reacting to it, and then as soon as the book is out and people start to read it, the reporters are saying, "Well, he got this anecdote wrong, and he got that anecdote wrong, and this is not quite right." By the way, do you know his reputation? Michael Wolff has burned sources. He often says off the record, but then he does on the record. And did you know he was trashing regular reporters way back? He did that in order to get access so that Trump would like him, so he'd let him in the White House. And that was about a one-day story, and everybody read that and was scratching their head a little bit. What do you make of this? Yeah. It's not as if the one anecdote, he mentioned a reporter for the Washington Post, Mark Berman.
Yes.
That he was at the Four Seasons lunching with all these bigwigs and power brokers and this, that, and everything else. And Berman wrote in and said, I don't need it Four Seasons. I can't afford the Four Seasons. And actually, he meant Mike Berman, who is a lobbyist who eats there all the time.
Oh, well, those guys get to eat there all the time. All right, well,
but it was just like what people say about, well, you used ammunition instead of magazine. That one thing now means you're not allowed to talk about any of it.
That's right.
Well,
You said it was lunch.
That's not how it works. And so you are so familiar with that example, it's pretty clear why that sort of criticism, where you're allowed to go in and fact check, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't change the overall arc of the book, which is that Trump is an idiot and people who work with him think so. And while this is happening, some of the other access journalists like Axios, Mike Allen and people like that.
Oh, that's why they call it Axios. All right. Yeah. I got
write in and say, you know what? Individual anecdotes might be wrong, but we're telling you everything that's in this book, we've heard off the record ourselves. And so then you step back and say, okay, well, wait a minute here. If everybody knows this off the record, why isn't it on the record? Yeah. And then the next iteration of discussing all of this then starts bringing up people like Ronald Reagan. And there's some pretty, and I have this up in the pundit roundup from today, but there are some nice pieces that people have written about back in the day with Ronald Reagan. And one of the better ones is written by David Perry, who goes by Lollard Fish on Twitter.
Of course.
Who wrote about how reporters really should be, careful about writing what they observe rather than what they hear. But on the other hand, you have to go back to Ronald Reagan, and there's a famous anecdote from Leslie Stahl, who I guess was the CVS correspondent at the time. And she had an interview where she had incredible doubts about Reagan's mental capacity while he was still in office, but was dissuaded from writing about it because the conversation then veered off to Hollywood stuff where Reagan was very sharp about. And a lot of Reagan's public appearances were, he forgot things, he didn't remember stuff, and so on and so forth. And then wrote a memoir and said, I'm really regretful that I never really told the public at the time that, Reagan appeared to have signs of Alzheimer's or signs of senility.
Yeah.
And so part of the reaction to Michael Wolff's book is stepping back and saying, well, if you guys all know this, why aren't you telling us? You didn't tell us about Reagan. What else are you not telling us? And then Michael Wolff goes on and makes it even worse or better or however you want to do it or more inflammatory because he gets on TV and says, what I saw is even worse than what's in the book. What does that mean? Why are you not telling us what it is that you are seeing? And if everybody sort of knows this and it's an open secret, is it like the Harvey Weinstein open secret that everybody knows but nobody's talking? Why aren't you talking? What is going on? And that's part of what's fueling all of the interest in this book. and why Trump's attacking it is only making it, even more solid in terms of it being a story.
All right. Yeah, I would.
And that was only by Saturday.
That's true. There was another day in there, wasn't there?
There was another day in there. So on Sunday, Stephen Miller, who is the only Nazi left standing in the White House now that Bannon and Gorka are gone, excluding Trump, assuming Trump doesn't know anything about anything and just will sign whatever's in front of him. And Stephen Miller is sent as a advocate for Trump, as a surrogate, on to CNN, and Jake Tapper starts to interview him. And Stephen Miller is obnoxious, and he talks over Tapper, and he, whenever Tapper asks him a question of substance, he filibusters, the talking filibuster in its glorious form.
True.
And starts to get more and more hostile, then starts just ragging on Jake Tapper and CNN, and Tapper cut him off and said, well, it's pretty obvious what's going on here. You're here in order to present this to an audience of one, and we know who that one person is, and you're wasting my viewers' time, and cuts him off. And Miller is actually escorted off the stage by security because he refuses to leave.
Yeah, I read about that. There was a couple of reports last night. They had to. Yeah, I don't know what he was. I don't think he was on the set. He was just nearby, but I don't know whether he was demanding to go back on. Turn those machines back on.
They cut off his microphone, and I think he was trying to sneak up behind him and keep talking into Jake Tapper's microphone.
That actually would have been pretty incredible.
It would have been.
I would like to see that.
So again, you have to point out this isn't in isolation. This is part of the reaction to Michael Wolff's book.
Yes, more books.
Otherwise he wouldn't have been on the show doing this.
That's true. And I also was entertained by. Jake had it entirely right when he said you're doing this for an audience of one, and that very audience of one, shortly thereafter, because he was not watching TV, tweeted his anger and dismay about the whole thing, and attacking Jake Tapper or whatever. But there's the audience of one I was just talking about. Thanks for proving me right. That was a great move because you trap the president can't not anger tweet about something when he's baited. Even if your bait is, I bet you're going to anger tweet about this.
And remember, he never watches CNN.
Right. Not only does he never watch TV, he never watches that channel on TV, except that time when and that's all it takes. But I never do that. All right, what if I put a guy on there who says he's going to praise you? Then I might.
So how'd it go? So here's some of the reaction I rounded up for the Pundit Roundup today. James Fallows says, in decades of seeing White House aides on TV, I can think of nothing remotely like the tone affect Stephen Miller has chosen. Even the testiest, Pat Buchanan, Jody Powell, Sununu, Carville, usually feigned affability, went on the screen. The obvious difference would seem to be that all the rest were conscious of playing to a larger audience, the public, congressional foes, allies, D.C. opinion, all that. Where it mattered that they seem likable, Miller does appear to have one-person audience in mind. And Jake Tapper did point out, audience of one aspect of Miller's performance, an admirably no BS approach to this. So that was Fallows' take on it. We have, of course, clips of the I think I've wasted enough of my viewers' time, which was the exact quote.
Right.
Kevin Cruz, the historian, points out if Tom Steyer really wants to bring this administration down, he should just fund the national speaking tour for Stephen Miller instead of spending all these ads on impeachment, which is what Steyer's doing. And why Steyer's doing that, by the way, is a completely open question. I suppose it's because he's making his name better known so he can run for senator or governor in California, but we'll see.
Maybe. Well, there's no explaining how a billionaire uses his money. That's not economics. That's just a crazy guy with unlimited resources. I don't know why I'm doing it.
And we happen to know that the idle rich are lazy and shiftless, which is why the Republicans are suggesting that everybody who gets help in welfare or something else, any kind of entitlement, really has to go get a job.
Yes.
Trump doesn't have a job.
No.
He wakes up and watches TV and doesn't go to work till about 11 or 11:30.
That's the news.
That's the news. So I don't know how that works, but everybody else should go and get a job.
Yes.
Ezra Klein read the book and said, now that I finished Michael Wolff's book, I can say nothing could possibly underscore the truth of Wolff's portrayal of Trump and of how Trump's staff humiliates themselves to please him more than Stephen Miller's performance on Jake Tapper's show.
Oh. Okay. I could have told you that without the book, but all right. He reads. He's a good guy.
Right? Margaret Sullivan over at the Washington Post says Fire and Fury proves an oft-forgotten rule. Don't assume we're off the record.
Even right now.
Right? Heidi Moore writes, what Tapper, Miller, and newly skeptical New York Times Trump coverage shows is the press smells blood, indicating Wolf book weakened Trump a lot. Again, you don't have to like Wolf, and many don't. But maybe the best part of that book is that it made D.C. reporters mad enough to compete.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good point.
I like that. Yeah, it's a good point.
By the way, I like that phrase of Wolf's book weakened Trump. That sounds like one German word for something really important. Wolf's book weakened Trump. I just like that. I just want to point that out.
Germans have a way of saying things that
That's right.
Nobody else can do. And that is absolutely true. In fact, I can't say it. That's how good it is.
Yeah.
Nicole Wallace says, I've known Jake Tapper for more than 15 years and have been a friend and source and a Times guest on the air. What he achieved today combined years of journalistic integrity, human restraint, and presence of mind that very few people possess. My take on it was that it was hard to tell from the ranting exactly what Miller was defending. But it's a great interview by Jake Tapper, who might want to consider psychiatry as a second career because flights of fancy and word salads are hard to follow, and Jake does a pretty good job.
Not bad. I don't think he's that restrained of a person, but he was very restrained in that one. That was a planned play, but a good plan and well done.
I suppose.
Oh, yeah. Everybody did well there, I think. I mean, and that's why I guess right-wingers are cheering Miller as the winner of that. But.
Well, that's part of it. I think some of the stupidest and lazy analysts and analyzing and punditry this entire year has been nothing matters because Trump has his base. And this is therefore for his base. And it only matters because he's talking to his base. Yes, we know. We've known that from like the second day of his presidency. But the fact of the matter is everybody else who is not his base is not really happy with this. And that's one of the reasons why you had the turnout you did in Virginia. It's one of the reasons why Doug Jones was competitive in Alabama, even before the sexual complaints and stories about Roy Moore started to circulate. So the fact of the matter is this does not play to the rest of the public particularly well. And you can only get so far playing to your base alone. In other words, 2016 was an aberration, and you shouldn't build your entire punditry career based on that happening again or happening now.
Nothing matters.
That's not what's happening.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It was interesting to note. I was glad that people had observed for us briefly that the reaction in this other alternative universe, a small 25% slice of the universe at best, they were certain that that thing we all saw, that the red light was green, that the apple was a banana, that the winner was the other guy who got thrown out and escorted out by security.
Right. I mean, we get that when you get your information from Fox News and InfoWars and nowhere else, that you may not hear and see what everybody else sees. But it's fascinating when you do hear and see what everybody else sees, and you still come to that conclusion.
Yeah, that is. I mean, you got to know that. We have to note it for the record. It doesn't mean that we do nothing about it. It just, okay, that this is happening. Take note. Be aware of that. Every once in a while, you'll run into one of these people. Don't waste your time with them, but it will happen.
Right. Let's see if we can pick out some other good reactions here. David Rockoff writes, Stephen Miller's making a very strong case that he's a very, very stupid man.
Excellent.
Mark Salter, who was an ex-McCain advisor, said, hey, Stephen Miller, you can't make the case that your boss isn't incapacitated by insecurity, resentment, and lunacy by going on TV and acting insecure, resentful, and nuts.
Did he run out of space for lunacy?
Christopher Orr writes, my principal takeaway from this interview is that Miller saw Animal House at a young age, mistakenly believed Niedermeyer to be the hero, and chose him as a lifelong role model.
Okay. That's an interesting take.
Well, but you get an idea of how it came across to people.
Yeah.
Jay Rosen said, I watched summary, the president's genius is incandescent, CNN is a waste treatment plant. Jake, you are so condescending, interview over.
Oh, as though he ended it.
Yeah. So
that's a spin.
I'm going to talk about two pieces here that I had from the Pundit Roundup. One of them is actually a subsequent follow-up Michael Wolff interview on the book that was in Hollywood Reporter. Hollywood Reporter has been putting Michael Wolff's stuff out for a while. And a lot of his interviews are going on there. And one thing that's important to emphasize is all of this stuff happened that we just spent a lot of time talking about before Michael Wolff's interview parade, where he goes on all the networks and all the TVs and all the talk shows and such, started a little bit on Sunday, but really the whole thing was supposed to be rolled out this week.
Oh, yeah.
So for the rest of this week, he's going to be on the soft news shows talking about this, bringing it to a wider audience than just the political junkies. Okay, so in Hollywood Reporter, let me just give you that link and it's about halfway down the page here. He's talking about various and sundry things. And he says, there's something you were criticized for in left-leaning media, and now with the book it seems you whiplash the other way. He was being criticized for being too harsh on Trump critics, and now that he's being too harsh on Trump. And he says, I just wrote what I thought and what I heard. That's one thing about the book. There really aren't any politics in it. I have no side here, which is true. He's only out for himself. I'm just interested in how people relate to one another, their ability to do their jobs in a much less abstract picture of this world than whatever the political thesis may or may not be. Mm-hmm. And so the interviewer says, so there's no long con here? You were just a neutral observer? He says, completely. I would have been perfectly happy to have written a contrarian book about interesting and potentially hopeful and novel Trump as president was. I would have written a positive Trump book, and I thought it would be a fun thing to do, an audacious way to look at the world. But then I got there and I thought, oh, my God.
Yes. Oh, my God.
Day by day, it seemed the guy was more dysfunctional.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can see I'm following along with the quote, and as he says at the end here, it wasn't even just him, it was seeing it, was listening to people around him. That's I guess, the big difference between his style of access journalism and the daily publication access journalism. I guess the long game is important. I'm glad he did it. Well, we'll discuss it a little bit more after a short break. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Stable Genius Netroots Radio. We are still stable. I think our signal's still going out. We're still with Greg Dworkin. He's still stable. He's still a genius. Let's bring him back in. Greg, you're stable, right?
Yeah.
Just wanted to give you a chance.
The stable is still open for business.
Okay, that's good news.
Just cleaning it out.
Yeah, and I see you're cleaning it out right into the Skype stream here. All of our they'll all be links for those of you to follow along in case you were interested in reading more about some of these stories that we are sort of rocketing through. And we have to do that in order to give you a taste of what's happening in the headlines. It's an abbreviated pundit roundup. For the unabridged pundit roundup, these stories can always be found in our daily post rounding up the day's events, so you can read and decide for yourself. I have a feeling you'll probably decide something along the lines of what Greg told you in the morning, but that's because we're all friends here. We agree with one another very frequently.
Yeah, pretty much. But, you used one word out of context, so therefore you're not qualified to really discuss that.
That's right.
This piece from Vox that Andrew Prokop wrote is a review of the book, pointing out some of the issues that people have brought up.
How many reviews did Vox do?
And he writes, journalist Michelle Cottle took stock of Wolff's work. After describing his quick wit, dizzying writing style, and willingness to say absolutely anything about anybody, which, by the way, is useful, in a catty, caustic way, which is really useful, and his fixation on culture-style buzz and money, 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 Cottle essentially argues that Wolff is more of a gossip compiler than a rigorous reporter. I'm trying to get a sense of why the reporters were so resentful of all of this, and this is why I was reading this piece. Much of the annoyance of Wolff's critics, the scenes in his columns weren't recreated so much as created, springing from Wolf's imagination rather than from actual knowledge of events. Even Wolf acknowledges that conventional reporting isn't his bag. Rather, he absorbs the atmosphere and gossip swirling around him at cocktail parties on the street, and especially during those long lunches at Michael's. He's around town enough to have these insights to spot people that come across pieces of information, and on a meta level, Wolf is resented for not playing by the rules of his chosen profession. He has a reputation for busting embargoes and burning sources by putting off-the-record comments on the record. And when you do that, you make all the sources mad at reporters in general, and that's one of the reasons why the other reporters really dislike him. But Armando sent me this terrific piece with a slightly different point of view by Drew McGarry that was in GQ entitled, "Michael Wolff Did What Every Other White House Reporter Is Too Cowardly to Do."
Oh, yeah, I saw that headline.
Yeah, it's because Wolff was willing to throw decorum away and torch his access, and more journalists should do the same. In other words, Wolff was willing to write this one piece knowing he'd get shut out of the White House and be lambasted, but he was willing to do it anyway. Whereas the others are holding back because they want the continued access.
This is an amazing contradiction to me.
Go.
I'm astounded by the accusation. I guess a little bit. I understand the point. Oh, he's willing to do what other reporters should be willing to do. Risk his access. And yet, the interesting thing is that he got more access than anybody. Yeah, he got it before, but he did.
But now he won't.
Yeah,
now
he won't
have any.
But he got what he needed, and he did it. But also, I guess.
So he did a sprint, and the other guy's a marathon.
Yeah.
I don't understand how he runs.
I guess so. And as you were reading the headline, and I did see that headline, Michael Wolff did what every other White House reporter is, what did they say, too cowardly to do? And I knew when I saw that headline, I'm like, well, that's not going to win any journalists over when you call them cowardly. But this is for us. We understand that. The headline's for us, not for them. But I also, I'm watching the previous, watching you or listening to you read through the previous review, the Fox thing about it, the caustic, catty writing, and the fixation on absorbing the culture and reflecting it that way. And it's funny because it occurs to me that you got to have the right code words, just as you were saying. If you say clip instead of magazine, you're out. Among the mainstream traditional newspaper-based media, I guess, their version of access journalism is very different, and it's a day access journalism thing, and it's an ongoing thing. And you don't write the book
that's why
and
it's
be
a
done
marathon.
with it.
You got to
That's
preserve
definitely
tomorrow.
true. And then, but it also occurred to me like you just have to have the right code words for it. All this stuff that they're like, he writes junk he overhears at parties, this dumb stuff, and then he constructs these things in his imagination. You know what? Swap that for optics and tell me what's different about what you're doing.
Right. And by the way, he says, hours and hours of tapes.
Yes.
Which are known as receipts.
Yes. Right.
He has the receipts. And he hosted some of the dinners that he was accused of making stuff up at. And he said, actually, I was there.
I know. I saw that one end of last week where people were accusing him of how could he possibly have known what happened at a private dinner with just 6 people? That's how you know this story is BS. And he's like, it was at my house.
It was at my house. One of the people wrote in and said, I was there too. And actually, it happened exactly that way.
I should note for the record, though, I was very impressed with that answer. But I should point out that the person who gave it, whose name I now don't remember anymore, less than an uninterested source. She is the co-founder of Hollywood Reporter. So she's going to chime in and say, yeah, it's all true.
But that's the whole background to all of this stuff.
Yeah,
everybody
we
knows everybody else.
All.
And nobody is a completely disinterested party here. And that's kind of not the point, is it? And so you can hone in on the tree and say this particular anecdote was wrong. He got Mark Berman wrong when he should have said Mike Berman, and he did this thing wrong. But the overall forest is on fire.
Yes, right.
And it's really helpful to point that out to people.
You're missing the forest for the flames.
Yeah, pretty much. So, it's a fascinating dynamic here. And, some of the reporters I spoke to on Twitter, initially said, yeah, but he got this fact wrong. It's important for us to be accurate, so on and so forth.
Yeah,
but the bigger picture, and by the way, the look that is given, the way this looks, that reporters knew all this stuff but didn't write it, is terrible. It's a terrible look. And they go so far as to admit that.
It's bad optics, guys, and we're allowed to talk about that.
Right. So, now that it's out there, then there's all these other stories about, okay, well, what about Trump's mental fitness? And is that appropriate to talk about or not? And guess what? A lot of people are talking about it now. Now, it may not be the case that just because he has his physical exam this coming Friday, that this is on the table. It doesn't mean that the 25th Amendment can be invoked, because you have to be pretty far gone for that to happen. It certainly doesn't mean impeachment's going to happen anytime sooner than November 2018, because the realities are you need a Democratic House to even go further and discuss it. But at least it is a current topic of conversation. And look what happened over the weekend. It was entirely consumed, and Washington was entirely consumed by this book, and as a sub story, Stephen Miller's appearance on CNN, when they were supposed to be selling this idiotic tax plan that everybody hates, and planning the future in terms of how they're going to go ahead and compete in 2018 in November. None of that happened.
That's true. What a good idea. I did see somebody say that, look, it was all pretty obvious to everyone that the book distracted them from anything.
It was something of a distraction.
Yeah,
I think
everyone
that's
should
fair
write
to say.
books now. Everybody tell all you know. Make it up. It doesn't matter. Let them attack you for making it up.
I mean, they've only been living and
breathing
breathing this for the last 5 days, so I think it's fair to say it's something of a distraction.
I should say so. And yeah. Oh, by the way, and we'll catch up on Wednesday and find out how much of a distraction it was for Congress when we find out what work they have and haven't been doing to avoid the next government shutdown threat.
Right. It was kind of interesting piece that was actually Paul Kane in the Washington Post, and I had this in the Pundit Roundup as well. Let me just throw it at the bottom of Skype so you can find it easy. And that is that this year is shaping up to be a clash of Republican idealists versus realists, bottom line being not a lot's going to get done.
Yep.
Paul Ryan is wanting to redo entitlement laws. And Mitch McConnell is going to say, we can't do that. We got to spend time selling this tax thing, or we're screwed even more than we already are. And who has the, who has the stomach to go and do something else this big after what just happened with both health care and with this tax bill? Yeah. We're kind of at a guess at this point.
That's true.
So Kane's prediction is nothing really happens legislatively. You're seeing it. They're just going to try to sell what they've already done.
Well, eventually, yes. It's just a question of when, and will they have enough time to do it, and can we keep them distracted and make the defense weaker?
So how's it all going for the Republicans? Well, Mike Murphy writes, Republican strategy. My morning rage therapy. I didn't spend 30-plus years busting my ass on campaign trail across 43 states to help elect lots of GOP congressmen, governors, and senators to see this clown wound our country, destroy my party, and debase the great cause of conservatism.
Oh, no? All right.
So
well.
he's not especially happy, and then there's others in the Republican Party who aren't that happy either.
Yeah, well, they're going to actually have to leave their desks and do something.
Right. Meanwhile, how's it going for the Democrats? Well, this is a more of a local thing I thought you might find interesting. In Virginia, a PPP poll, this is posted in Blue Virginia by Locale. In swing districts, Virginia voters strongly support Governor-elect Ralph Northam and the Democratic agenda.
Okay, good. He's the governor.
Right. They overwhelmingly back Medicaid expansion, raising teacher pay, and background checks on gun sales. Also, and a strong majority in Virginians in swing districts view Northam favorably. So I just always like to key findings from the poll here. Medicaid expansion, 60% of voters support expanding Medicaid, 33% oppose. Gun violence prevention, 84% support background checks. Education, 80% of voters support raising teacher pay by 2%. Creating economic opportunities, 65% of voters support free job training and workforce credentialing for jobs that are available. Women's health, 63% of voters support a health program that makes all forms of birth control available to Virginia women upon their request. And, of course, transportation, always big for Northern Virginia. 62% of voters support an additional regional tax on gasoline and hotels dedicated to improving the metro system if Maryland and D.C. contribute as well. That includes 66% of Democrats, 65% of independents, and 54% of Republicans. And then they list the districts which this was taken in, if you want to know specifically. So I always go back to I think what we really need is a whole bunch more essays on what Ralph Northam is doing wrong and how Democrats don't stand for anything.
Oh, okay, well, we'll probably get some. Although, honestly, with this book out, man,
at this point, you have to be against Trump. You have to be an honest candidate who's basically, playing themselves on the campaign trail, and be for some of these programs that happen to be very popular. I don't really see this as rocket science.
Me neither. Now, he didn't.
But I'm not a stable genius, so I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's true. He didn't. I don't know. He didn't get the greatest PR start in the world. Certainly true. You don't want to do anything to draw the eye of Sauron away from this book at this point. So you want to be careful with things. But he was a little overly cautious coming out of the gate, and hopefully that changes.
Anyway, just be authentic, be yourself, and I think you'll do fine.
He is a cautious guy.
The thing about the Golden Globes yesterday, which I didn't see, I'll have to catch up on Oprah's speech.
Yes.
But Oprah for president, hopefully that'll last about 10 minutes, and then we can go on to do other things.
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody's super tied up in that. It's a fun thing to say, and I don't think it's gotten in the way of anyone's work this morning. Everyone got in the car and went to the office just the same. Nobody stopped, mass protests in the street demanding Oprah take over anytime soon. So I think we'll be all right with that one. Hey, I could live with her being president rather than Trump. How about that?
Oh, so could I,
enough?
But I would think that having expertise in foreign policy and having a better sense of how to handle North Korea might be, one of the things that might be on the resume that you want to take a look at.
That is true.
Anyway, with that, I'm going to cut it off. It's already 20 degrees here, so I have to go out and, plant the back 40 here because it's time to grow some corn. But this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my frozen friend, David Waldman Kagro in the morning. Thanks so much for listening, folks. It's a new week and a new year and certainly a new day. I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll do it again.
All right. It'll be a new day on Wednesday anyway.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks, Greg.
Or we can do this again. It'll be Groundhog Day.
Oh, yeah, why not? I see no reason why.
That's the nice thing about podcasts. You can just play it over and over.
That's true. We should do that.
I wonder what'll happen this time.
This time, Trump will be a stable genius. I'm sure of it.
We shall see. Take care, and I'll talk to you.
All right. Take care, Greg. We'll talk again on Wednesday. Yeah, Greg is wrong. I did find that out from Armando, who made sure to let us know via text in Skype, just in case you had any doubts about it. That's where it all stands. I'm not certain that there was anything in particular that he was wrong about. It's just important that that gets said from time to time, just to keep everybody grounded, humble, stable, etc. We have to point that out from time to time. Okay, let's see. Is there anything, by the way, in the various links that we didn't get to? I think we kind of hit on each of these things. Sometimes there's so much news that we don't get to every one of the stories, that even the ones that Greg has collected, that we seem to skip from one to another. Here's one suggested to us in comments as we go along. Let's see. I want to catch up on a couple of comments here. First of all, Maureen reminding me that the backup on the dinner party story was Janice Min, co-founder of The Hollywood Reporter, who corroborated the story of Michael Wolff's dinner party with Steve Bannon and Roger Ailes. Yes. Thanks very much for confirming that one. And I had it in the back of my head here, like, I think it was Janice Min was her name, but I don't know her in any other context except that's the name I think I read on the tweet a couple of days ago. I'm not up on Hollywood Reporter and what it is. I'm not a Hollywood type person, generally speaking. I like movies. They're nice. Television, fun thing to do. But that's about it, and I just don't keep track of who's who there. I'm a little worried about the Hollywood Reporter, that the title of the publication, and is it a publication? Just worries me, makes me think. It's like, am I getting my news from, what's the gossip show that's on TV all the time? Damn it. And it goes by just the initials, and I can't remember what it is now. Anyway, the show with all the paparazzi meeting in their newsroom talking about all their stories. Dang, I can't even remember. And as soon as somebody says it, I'll say, how can I possibly forget? Anyway, it worries me that I get my news that way. But they do, they report just like everybody else. They don't want to be wrong, and they probably get sued for libel, etc., more often than any traditional mainstream media press. And I guess maybe that's why Trump is so keen on changing the libel laws. That was another of the scary things over the weekend, by the way. His demanding, again, as he did during the campaign, that we loosen libel laws. Yes, thank you, Bill. TMZ, that's the one I'm thinking of. Does anybody know what TMZ stands for, by the way? I'm not certain whether they've ever said it. Anyway, yeah, TMZ is the show I'm thinking of. And even TMZ has broken some interesting political stories from time to time. There have been, I don't know, probably a good half a dozen. For some reason, the one that comes immediately to mind was they were the only ones staking out some of the secret meeting places where the Koch brothers were convening their top donors and the top the biggest names in politics that they had bought with the money that they had, and they had gathered from other big Republican donors, and they were having these secret conclaves someplace to plan the future of the world in their volcano headquarters. And TMZ actually staked those places out and was reporting on whose private jets were landing nearby and going to the meeting. And that was amazing that the regular media didn't do that. Let's see, Bill knows here, or at least he's typing something that looks like he knows. TMZ stands for 30-mile zone, in reference to the historic studio zone within a 30-mile radius at the intersection of West Beverly Boulevard and North La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles, California. That makes a little bit of sense. 30-mile zone. So it was like the 30-mile radius around the studio areas where I guess all the celebrities would hang out and mill about and could be photographed and interviewed. I think I get it. Interesting. All right, what else have we got here? Let's see. So thank you to Bill and for the reminder from Maureen. A couple of story suggestions being floated from Kate Sherrill. And let's see. Just to go all the way back here, Michael Musson telling us it turns out that the best one to cover Trump was a fabulist because the situation was already so fabulous that he could avoid his worst instincts. So sending Michael Wolff did make a great deal of sense. I am fascinated by the whole fight between Wolff and I guess what you would call traditional media types, especially about the access thing. And it's also kind of fascinating to watch media critics, especially progressive media critics, enjoying the book so much because, of course, it confirms everything we already thought or knew about Donald Trump, and that's fair enough. I think that's fairly, a pretty human trait. I don't get upset about that. I thought it was interesting, though, to remind everybody that, this is like sort of the ultimate in access journalism, and we've been so hard on access journalism and have contended very frequently that it's a terrible thing to do, to suck up to a president and give more flattering coverage than they deserve in order to maintain access. And I guess that's the big difference, and maybe one of the reasons why we're able to enjoy the Michael Wolff thing so much now is because there's a different kind of access journalism. I'm certain that had you asked around, if you back up the tapes 6 months or a year, had we been paying attention, which we weren't, because we don't typically day to day spend time thinking about what is a essentially access journalist, gossip columnist type journalist doing with his day. Michael Wolff in particular, he wasn't somebody that we were all reading regularly, not someone that captured our eye all the time. Though I'm certain that there were some of us, perhaps many of us, who I didn't, but maybe many of you noticed when he attacked other journalists or was critical of other journalists, being so heavily critical of Donald Trump. And I'm sure that somebody somewhere along the line, and probably a lot of you, thought this is terrible because here's a person who's a respected writer and reporter, in some quarters anyway, famous at the very least, saying all these terrible things about these reporters who are writing negative stories about Trump. And we love negative stories about Trump. So this must be a pro-Trump person. We hate them. And then 6 months, a year, whatever it is later, out comes the book, and it's as negative as can be, and it's driving Donald Trump himself crazy, and everybody loves it. And I guess we're all big Michael Wolff fans for the moment. But, well, if I were Michael Wolff, I wouldn't bank on it too much. Get paid, by all means, deposit those checks. Apparently he has no problem in that respect. I guess one thing I would point out in all this, one of the weirdnesses in all this is a completely different world that Michael Wolff is circulating in. And I guess that's where Trump lives, so you got to circulate there. But celebrity journalism, whether it's the TMZ people, I'm not under any illusions that the TMZ reporters are living, 1% of 1% lifestyles or anything. But what they're covering is, for instance, I was struck by Janice Min's description of this party. She had some things to say about the party that were like very off-putting. I thought it was very informative that she said, I was there and I can tell you that everything that got said is 100% accurate. But then you read about, what is she talking about? She's talking about having attended an exclusive dinner party for 6, at which the big name guests here are Roger Ailes and Steve Bannon, and then her and Michael Wolff, and then there's this other couple there, and I had to Google who they were. And essentially, it's just like, wow, that's like a really ridiculous, super exclusive rich person's dinner or something. It wasn't the Koch brothers or anything, but just rather not quite ultra wealthy, but extraordinarily wealthy New York society types having some dinners at some nice apartment or whatever, and you have the access to invite Roger Ailes to it, and so whatever. But nothing wrong with it or anything. But she was describing it as just a funny time we had, plotting the future of America essentially, and outlining with broad strokes what politics was essentially going to be like going forward. And that's what the coal miners wanted out of the rest of us here, for you guys to have exclusive dinners. That and the description of, by the way, yes, Greg, you got it wrong, so you're not allowed to talk about it anymore. The Four Seasons scene was a breakfast, apparently, and not a lunch. So you're not allowed to talk about this anymore. But the scene being described by Wolff at the Four Seasons, where he got the name of the person wrong, and so ended up thinking it was a Washington Post reporter instead of a lobbyist, was Ivanka Trump being shepherded around town and stopping in at the Four Seasons for breakfast, which was interesting all by itself. Like, the Four Seasons is not some place I've ever contemplated having breakfast ever. Just there's no chance of it. I mean, I suppose if it was my 50th wedding anniversary, I would consider maybe we would make reservations for dinner at the Four Seasons, but I can't even contemplate the worldview in which you say, breakfast at the Four Seasons is a normal thing to do. You're talking about a very exclusive club of people here, and it's interesting how easily people mix into that group, and just what a different world it really is. There's all sorts of detail about it out there. I'll have to dig out the tweets, both from Janice Min and my own reaction to it, and then some other reactions that were really interesting, watching people critique the reporting too. Like the fact that he got the wrong guy it's a basic error, yeah, and some fact checking would probably have helped avoid embarrassing error like that. But as Greg said, the story is really about the atmosphere and what's happening in and around Trump and Trump's White House, rather than was it a reporter or a lobbyist who was there. But, I'm seeing even like Brian Beutler was particularly impressed with, it looked like, if I understood what he was doing, it looked like he was particularly impressed with the pickup of this factual error. And I could see certainly a point that, where that Brian and others would make about Michael Wolff. He's just so sloppy in the details. It bothers me because I'm a pretty careful and thorough professional reporter. And since I personally am not, it doesn't bother me a great deal. I'm not a reporter. But I can see why it would get under their skin. But clearly the story that they're telling is mostly true and worth telling. And I'm just sort of interested in watching those reactions and the reaction of mainstream media that prevents them from, being willing to mine this book for what it's worth. I think, although, perhaps they're just doing it in their own way. Anyway, time for us to reset over the top of the hour break, get our bearings once again, take a look through Pocket and see which stories we need to get to shift gears, or at least give a more complete context to the fury over the fire and the fury that happened over the weekend. Still lots to hit on that one, but lots going on in this country, in this capital of this country, and around the world that we ought to bring you up to date on. Many of you suggesting such stories. We'll round them up and be back for our second hour after this short break with this exciting music to carry you through as well. Good morning and welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. See, I told you, not such a very long break at the top of the hour. Now we can get back on track with the stories that, A, those that I put away in Pocket for discussion over the weekend, B, those I tweeted about but forgot to put away, and C, and these are in no particular order, those which you are suggesting to me right now and have suggested over the weekend. And there's some mix. I can't tell sometimes in Pocket whether these are ones I found just wandering through the wilds, or whether these are some that you suggested to me. I try to put both the tweet and the story away to try and clear up on some of those things. Here's a weird story. This just happens to be sitting at the top of the list for no particular reason. One more story of an outrageously underqualified nominee for the Trump administration. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel for a lot of their nominations for these jobs. It's actually it's a fairly difficult job, as I lean away here, to fill an administration, a normal administration, which actually seeks to fill all of the jobs already created without necessarily creating any new ones. There's thousands and thousands, I think some tens of thousands of jobs that are available in any new administration that the president essentially gets to fill by nomination. So among those thousands, one or two, 3, 5, 15, there's bound to be a bunch of losers in there in any administration. And probably if you gave scrutiny to every single one of them, and you are supposed to give some scrutiny to every single one of them, although very often, the ones that require Senate consent very often just get a quick summary glance, but you have no particular reason typically to doubt basic facts about, say, their employment records or whatever. But this is happening over and over again with Trump appointees, some of whom are telling the truth about their employment records. They're just woefully inadequate to the task or directly in contradiction to the mission that they're supposed to be undertaking. But very often we find out that they are fabricated as well, and there's another one of these. Think Progress is reporting on Robert Weaver, the Trump administration's nominee to head the Indian Health Service. As it turns out, he's kind of a weird guy. Check this out. Joshua Eaton reporting on this story. Robert Weaver, the Trump administration's nominee to head the Indian Health Service, may have misrepresented his employment at a Missouri hospital, according to a report Friday in the Wall Street Journal. That doesn't sound so bad, right? Weaver, 39, it's not good, but okay, he misrepresented his employment at a Missouri hospital. He said he was the director of something and he was just an assistant director. What do we mean? Weaver, 39, is a member of the Quapaw tribe. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that anything. It's Quapaw. I'm going to try to avoid with the Quapaw, but maybe that's it. I'm sorry to everybody for not knowing how to pronounce this thing, but he's a member of a Native American tribe, apparently, which is interesting all by itself because at first glance, one, his name being Robert Weaver, and two, he scans very quickly as white guy, and he may even, many people are of mixed races, and you can't guess what their background or heritage is. That's always true. But it's the sort of thing that Donald Trump has a very clear and public track record of ridiculing all the time. Just see the Elizabeth Warren stories. Anyway, Weaver, 39, is a member of the Quapaw tribe of Oklahoma. The White House announced his nomination last October, saying he would bring, quote, nearly 2 decades of experience in hospital, mental health administration, and entrepreneurship to IHS, the Indian Health Service. That sounds okay, right? Weaver reportedly told members of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee that he worked in, quote, supervisory and management positions. All right. At St. John's Regional Medical Center in Joplin, Missouri from 1997 to 2006. His resume, available online, says he managed, quote, all accounts receivable, budgets, patient access, and physician recruitment in various positions for the hospital. But several employees who worked in those areas of the hospital between 1997 and 2006, imagine having to check this stuff, told the Wall Street Journal they did not recall Weaver. Like, that's odd. Not, oh, well, he wasn't really in charge. I don't even know who this guy is. Wow. I was the budget coordinator during that whole time. Rhonda Faust, who worked in finance at the hospital from 1981 to 2010, told the Journal, if this person was over budgets, I would have known them. Jane Obert, possibly Aubert, right? The hospital's compliance officer from 1992 to 2008. And Diane Sadler, who worked at the hospital as an accounting manager from 1993 until 2010, did not recall working with Weaver. That's bad news. Augusto Noronha, the hospital's chief financial officer from 1999 to 2005, and Wayne Nothi, guessing again at his pronunciation, a former hospital controller, said they'd never heard of the nominee. That is very troubling. I'm sure I would have remembered the last name Weaver, Sadler said, because that was my grandmother's last name. It's also not very hard to remember. One administrator contacted by the Journal, Bob Henderson. How could I not? I'll never forget Bob Henderson, right? He didn't recall Weaver. Henderson, the hospital's former director of patient financial services, said Weaver worked as a patient registrar in the emergency room. Wait a minute. So he did not. He did recall Weaver. Oh, I was going to say, are you not recalling Weaver right now? When you said, I guess I just after seeing everybody else not recall him, he did. Bob Henderson, who you'll never forget, does remember Weaver because how could you forget Weaver, right? So he worked as a patient registrar in the emergency room and eventually supervised some other patient registrars, though not the whole department. That is a very different description of his job there. The hospital could not confirm details of Weaver's employment because this is the part that turned it into a headline. Okay, so far it's a standard resume inflation story, though it's an egregious overinflation of the resume, to be sure. But what made this a headline was basically he's like, well, I could prove to you that I really did work in all of these jobs just as I said on my resume, but all the work records for the hospital were destroyed by a tornado. I mean, there's the dog ate the homework thing, and that, but in Oklahoma, Your work records could have been destroyed by a tornado. That's true. You can even ask his Canadian girlfriend, and she'll be able to tell you. Oh, well, you can't because she lives in Canada. And there's no phones there, so you'll never be able to. I always wondered why that was a viable excuse for a girlfriend that that you totally had, but no one ever met or could contact for any reason. She lives in Canada, and you can't contact Canada because it's a frozen wasteland. She could pick up the phone and just dial the right area code. Hello, are you this guy's girlfriend? No, I'm sorry. The records of our dating were destroyed in an earthquake, a tornado. There's no uniquely Canadian disaster that I'm aware of. An oil train fire, that's possible. But we have plenty of those too. I'm not trying to insult you, Canada. You'll know when I'm trying to do that. Okay, well, that's true. It actually says that. The hospital couldn't confirm details of Weaver's employment because their records were destroyed in a massive tornado. I question how massive it was. But they do say massive tornado. In 2011, they left 158 dead. That is massive. And over 1,000 injured, plus all the records. Not even getting to that. A spokesperson for the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the Indian Health Services, told the Journal that the tornado destroyed Weaver's own records from his time at the hospital. So now you can just say, I was a surgeon for 20 years. Were you really? I was the chief of, whatever department, but, the tornado. So I guess that's what you get to do now. In a profile published last November in Tribal Business Journal, Weaver related how he began working at the hospital in college. He'd been trying to get an entry-level hospital job without any success, he told the Business Journal. When he complained to a classmate he'd been tutoring in art appreciation. Wow. The man told him to come see him in his office. The man turned out to be a vice president at the hospital. He greeted me with a pack of paperwork and told me to show up on Saturday, Weaver said. I spent years there working in 7 different positions. Weaver told the Senate Indian Affairs Committee that he oversaw 80 to 100 staff during his first few positions at the hospital, according to the Wall Street Journal. His account to the Tribal Business Journal of a hospital administrator helping him to get an entry-level job during college appears to cast doubt on that claim. The Tribal Business Journal article doesn't mention St. John's Regional Medical Center by name, but St. John's is the only hospital listed on Weaver's public resume, and the dates for Weaver's stated employment at the hospital line up with his time in college. I guess I might also ask, were any other hospitals' work records destroyed by a massive tornado in 2011? I suppose that's possible, but it doesn't sound likely. I don't know why we're going through such contortions. There's actually considerably more to the story here, but I think the meat of it is my employment records got destroyed in a tornado, which can happen, and apparently did happen, but you're not supposed to just then take that as license to claim that you were director of the hospital or the chief heart surgeon there or anything like that. It's you're being a little overly opportunistic, let's say. Interesting, couple of stories also making their way across the Twitter transom this morning. Let's see. Kate Sherrill has a couple of them, and there are at least a few that we should dive into. One more so, let's say, than the rest. But I do want to note for the record something happening out in Saudi Arabia. Again, not a country, but a large estate. 11 Saudi princes sent to their rooms, apparently. 11 Saudi princes arrested after protesting over their utility bills, which isn't something you normally think of Saudi princes as doing, so I'm a little bit intrigued about this. But out in Saudi Arabia, they're arresting all the princes. You can't do anything. Don't step out of line as a prince. Right now in Saudi Arabia, you'll get arrested and imprisoned in, it sounds good, the Ritz-Carlton. But there have been some weird stories that we haven't gotten to, but though people have suggested them to me, and I've pocketed a bunch of them, that I think they might be really seriously, mistreating / torturing some of the people that they're holding there. And you would think that can't be possible in the Ritz-Carlton because they're so concerned about their brand. But I guess if you own the whole country, or pretend country, then you can do what you like. And this is it's a major, serious political event and a coup of sorts. It's not just a joke what's going on there, and we really do need to catch up on that stuff. This is an brief NPR story, so we can kind of plow through it just to put a marker down and remind ourselves we need to turn an eye eventually back to Saudi Arabia. Camelia Domonovsky, I'm once again mangling a last name here, writing for NPR on this one. 11 royal princes in Saudi Arabia have been arrested, according to Saudi authorities, which would be, their parents and aunts and uncles, I guess, allegedly after they protested over a decree that stops the government from covering the cost of electric and water bills. Now, water bills I could see being a big problem in Saudi Arabia, though electric bills, again, they produce, the energy that they need. Is the electric really a problem? But I guess the princes wanted the government to continue paying, and they probably use way too much as it is, and this is probably a good idea to let them handle this thing personally. Not that there's very much difference between the government paying for it and princes of the government paying for it out of, quote-unquote, their salaries, which they get for doing God only knows what. Nothing, really. The princes also demanded compensation for a death sentence implemented in 2016 against one of their cousins, Reuters reports. I can't say I don't sympathize there about, somebody being killed and all that, but it's just uniquely, I guess, uniquely Saudish, I guess, that you would even think to make such a claim. And a good reminder that the place is just governed as it's not really a country. It's a compound owned by a single extended family. So they want to be paid for a death sentence implemented, let's say carried out. Is that what that happened? In 2016 against one of their cousins, who was likely also one of the princes. Anyway, this is the second time in 2 months that nearly a dozen princes have been arrested by authorities. In November, just to catch up, 11 princes were among the 200-odd people. They weren't odd people. We don't know the number. 200 odd people. They were largely odd also. Arrested in an anti-corruption sweep as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, remember MBS, consolidated power. NPR, who's not a Saudi prince at all, but National Public Radio, NPR's Jackie Northam reports that the new arrests were sparked by austerity measures. Austerity measures among the Saudi princes. Put in place by the Crown Prince. He was tired of paying everybody's bills, I guess. Saudi Arabia's Attorney General, Saud al-Mojab, Saudi Arabia's Attorney General. Who is he? Mr. Saud, another of the Mr. Sauds, says the 11 princes were arrested after refusing to leave a palace in Riyadh over a decree that ordered the state to stop paying their utility bill. They all live in one palace? The princes were taken to a maximum security prison, yowza, and face a number of charges. In a statement, Mojab said, "No one is above the law, except us." The arrests are reflective of the hardline stand by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to push through austerity measures, but perhaps as a sign that the cuts are too deep. Last week, King Salman announced that state employees would receive a monthly bonus for the next year because of the Trump tax cuts. No doubt. They're all getting a bonus. So good. Plus, you're all laid off. Here in this country, that's another of the stories that we really have to get to, is the companies that were, with all sorts of flash, pomp, and circumstance, announcing bonuses for their employees and agreeing to tie that to the Trump tax cuts, are now laying those same workers, in many cases, off. Many of them right before Christmas, which is really not a good time to lay anybody off. In Saudi Arabia, it doesn't matter as much. They're not as big on Christmas in Saudi Arabia. So I guess you could go ahead and do that now. The timing isn't an issue. But it's essentially like a little mini estate version of what we're doing here in this country. You all get bonuses, but we're all going to lay you off from being princes, which, for the rest of us, like, if you don't live the princely lifestyle, getting laid off, it sucks. It could ruin your life, no doubt about it. But it's moving from employment and relative prosperity to unemployment and possibly to poverty, which is horrible. But I guess the trade-off, if you're living so high on the hog, you're a Saudi prince. If you get fired from being a Saudi prince, that means going to prison. That's not good. But that's the game. That's the Game of Thrones, essentially, right? That's, he named it that for a good reason. You're on top of the world and you can do whatever you want, but when you fall, there's no coming back from falling out of favor in the Game of Thrones. You get decapitated, or you go to maximum security prison, and that's the trade-off. You get all the benefits in the world and live above the law as a fabulously wealthy prince of Saudi Arabia or anywhere else, the United States for that matter. And when you go down hard. But here in America, where we work as a liberal democracy, a representative republic, a meritocracy, there's no, you can live as a 1% of 1%er, and then when things go sour, you declare bankruptcy, you mill about a little bit, other people give you money because you used to have money, you just continue being fabulously wealthy for no particular reason. So we've dampened all the oscillation out of our society, which is supposed to be a great thing, and it really actually isn't. And subject for another day. Saudi Arabia has been pursuing austerity measures, including imposing a new tax and cutting some subsidies and payments to royal family members after years of low oil prices. But some members of the royal family, including the Crown Prince, don't seem to be feeling the pinch. How do you like that? Pretty amazing, right? In November, according to U.S. intelligence officials, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman paid a record-breaking $450 million for a Leonardo da Vinci painting. How do you like that for somebody who's not supposed to be into graven images? Well, it doesn't matter. When you're the Crown Prince, you get to do whatever you want. And when you're no longer the Crown Prince, you get your head cut off. That's the Game of Thrones. All right. Just thought I'd throw that one out there. There are, as I said, other stories, and I just reminded myself of the one that I needed to get to, and now I can't remember what it was. Where were we on this? What was it that reminded me of the story that we had waiting? Dang it. See, this is where I need a producer or a sidekick to say, what did I just say I was going to get to? Was it a story? It wasn't austerity measures, and it wasn't the 200 or so people arrested. Where were we? Oh, yes, the layoffs. That's right. Did anybody tweet that yet? I do want to get to that story. Now, let's see. We'll go back into Pocket. Who wrote that up? I know that Think Progress had something on that. And there was much more, too. There was at least 2 write-ups about it. Oh, there's the Think Progress one. We'll go to that. Though others tend to put a juicier spin on things. We'll go to the very staid and mostly under control Think Progress. Tara Culp Wrestler, I'm not familiar with, but new name that we call out over at Think Progress. No doubt living up to the fabulous standards there. Let's see if she's a little more exciting about this. Companies that announced big bonuses after GOP tax cut are now laying off their workers. Nice trickle-down economics you've got there, says the subheader. I like it. I like the style, Tara. Let's see what you got. At least 2 major companies, she's probably been writing there for 20 years, and I have no idea. At least 2 major companies that publicly announced large bonuses for their employees. After the passage of a massive GOP-led tax overhaul, which represented a windfall for wealthy Americans and big corporations, good ad, quietly laid off hundreds of workers at the same time. Comcast laid off more than 500 sales employees right before Christmas, according to documents reviewed by media outlets including the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philly.com, and the Daily News. So I guess it must have happened in the Philly area. The documents were confirmed by at least one former Comcast employee who was not identified in the press. AT&T is also in the process of laying off thousands of employees, according to the Communications Workers of America Union, which represents AT&T workers. CWA filed a lawsuit against the company, claiming that some of those layoffs are needless and that the timing of the terminations, just 2 weeks before Christmas, represents an extraordinary act of corporate cruelty. Both telecommunications giants struck a very different tone in the aftermath of the tax bill that was rushed through Congress last month. Comcast and AT&T were among the businesses that claimed Republican lawmakers' efforts to restructure the tax code in favor of wealthy corporations would allow them to be more generous to their workers, and publicly announced $1,000 year-end bonuses for their employees. The CEOs of both companies specifically cited the tax bill in separate press releases, touting these special bonuses, quote, special bonuses. But Larry Robbins, vice president of CWA Local 4900, told the Indy Star that AT&T started privately notifying its workforce of impending layoffs at the same time as it publicly celebrated the benefits of the tax bill. We believe the $1,000 bonuses and the promise of 7,000 new jobs are all a publicity stunt, Robbins said. In general, union leaders have been incredibly skeptical of the big companies promising bonuses to their employees in the wake of the new tax overhaul, after Southwest Airlines became the latest company to announce its plan to award $1,000 bonuses. And why $1,000 every time? I don't know. Is there any provision in the tax bill that dictates that it has to be 1,000 or that 1,000 is the max or something? I don't know. Anyway, the Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Organization, AMFA, told Think Progress that the gesture isn't enough to make up for years of workers' stagnant pay and the company's unfinished collective bargaining agreement, which is currently under negotiations. Republican lawmakers touted their tax plan as good news for American workers, arguing that providing corporate tax cuts allows these companies to put money toward worker compensation and job creation. This dubious theory, known as trickle-down economics, hasn't been borne out in U.S. history and is unlikely to work as promised in the Trump era either. Even though promises of big worker bonuses, and they're not that big, have successfully captured headlines, not compared to executive bonuses anyway, large corporations have already signaled that their shareholders are the ones who will reap the greatest benefits of the tax overhaul. Shareholders, you remember that whole thing. Got to maximize shareholder value, right? There's some new writing about that out there, too. Several major companies have announced massive share buybacks, which don't do anything to benefit their workers, but instead further enrich their shareholders. So, poof, there goes most of that trickle-down money after all. All right, well, we're up to date on that front. Let's see. Who sent me this one here? Yes, as a matter of fact, here, once again, I remembered to put together both the tweet and the article. Kurt, thank you, Kurt, for Audible Video on Twitter, sending me this piece, which is not news. It's from 2013. I don't know that we'll go through it, but perhaps it's something we would all like to put in our archives. That's what he sort of offered it up to me. He says, I don't know if this is in your archive. So here, 2013 piece from the European Financial Review called The Shareholder Value Myth. And not part of the canon that we have read into the record to date, and but it's been out there for quite a while. I was pleased to have it to put away. Lynn A. Stout is the name of the writer here. Let me just double check by going to the actual article itself rather than the pocket view, which is somehow incorrect. No, we got it right. Lynn Stout. The shareholder value myth. Shareholder primacy theory is suffering a crisis of confidence. In shareholder value myth, the shareholder value myth, how putting shareholders first harms investors, corporations, and the public, Lynn Stout discusses how the traditional managerial focus on the shareholders' interests can be harmful for the corporation and even for shareholders themselves, and how it is more valuable to spread the focus over several objectives, or as I like to call it, stakeholders. So an excerpt from a book of the same name, well worth reading, but a very, relatively long read for the show. But we'll put it out there and allow everybody to catch up on their reading. And again, thanks, Kurt, for sending that, because I'm mostly winging it on that subject. Not something I've formally studied or read a great deal about. It just sort of seems to present itself as a self-evident truth in watching what really happens and what the real results of trickle-down economic theory put into practice actually is. Not hard to reach that conclusion, just good to know that it's backed up by people who do so more thoroughly and scientifically than I do. All right. Let's see. There is a bunch of other interesting things, some of which are news, some of which are commentary, which we'll save for our final segment, including a piece in The Atlantic, also by James Fallows, getting a lot of attention these days. How actual smart people talk about themselves. I thought an important entry. And then a weird one that Raw Story picked up on. Oops, I'm a little late with my outro music here, so we won't go out on the most exciting part of our music, but this is sort of an interesting observation. Trump aides felt free to talk candidly in front of Wolf because they thought Fire and Fury wouldn't come out until, quote, next year. And they were right. It's just that next year is now. They forgot what next year actually meant. There's some very dumb people there in that White House. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Just a few seconds off the mark here on this one. I'm getting worried. It may be time now to get a backup microphone. As I recall, the last time the microphone actually died on us, I was having trouble getting the mute button on and off. And I don't know whether I'm just doing it with an unsteady hand today or, it's an aging microphone. Probably always wise to have a backup on hand. And since I don't have to leave the house to actually do that anymore, I can probably order one up and have one on hand in case the thing finally falls dead one day. Anyway, lots to round up, as I mentioned. And I almost feel like the thing to do here is to go through the headlines of things. And maybe we'll dive into the lead on some of these things just to get a number of them on the record. There was that weird story from over at Raw Story, where stories are weird. That's what Raw Story is kind of all about. Bob Brigham wrote this one up for Raw Story. Trump aides felt free to talk candidly in front of Wolf because they thought Fire and Fury wouldn't come out until next year. And there was just some misunderstanding about what next year meant. In an interview with the Hollywood Reporter on Saturday, again, Hollywood Reporter, the favored outlet for explainer pieces by Wolf himself about his book, he explains how the short-sightedness of the Trump campaign allowed him unscrutinized West Wing access, a lot of which was disputed by your traditional media journalists. There's no way anybody had that much access. Other reporters says, I saw him there all the time. Anyway, he goes in there, he says in his interview, I literally think you go in there and say, I'm writing a book, and they go, oh, a book. It's like a cloak of invisibility. That's how he describes it. And then also they would do this thing where they would be like, oh, this is off the record. And I would say, I would like to use it for the book. And they would say, well, when does that come out? And I would say, next year. Oh, yeah, okay, fine, Wolf recounted. Wolf explained a similar experience when he wrote a biography on Fox News owner Rupert Murdoch. This is why this is interesting. Check this out. The distinct feeling that you have when you say that you're writing a book is that these guys don't care about you. You're kind of a non-entity, a book. Trump is not getting excited about somebody writing a book, Wolf explained. I remember when the Murdoch book came out, and Murdoch's guy, former News Corporation Marketing and Corporate Affairs executive Gary Ginsberg is who we're talking about. Gary Ginsberg called me furious and said, what is this? This book is all about him. I said, it's a biography. And Ginsberg says, but it's so personal. That's when I realized these guys don't just not read books. They don't know what books are. The short-sightedness of the White House echoes the short-sightedness of the Trump campaign described in the book. And here a quote from it. Not only did Trump disregard the potential conflicts of his business deals and his real estate holdings, he audaciously refused to release his tax returns. Why should he if he wasn't going to win? Page 18 of the book asks, this is the story about how, he was in it not to win it. Wolf also told the Hollywood Reporter what he had heard from White House sources since publication of the bestseller. I hear that the president is very angry, or let me be precise. I hear that he is truly bouncing off the walls, Wolf said of the Oval Office reaction. In a second Saturday interview, Wolf told the BBC that the book was likely to bring down the Trump administration. Boy, I hope that's the case, but still a long way to go on that one. But yeah, lots of interesting reactions, lots of interviews upcoming with Michael Wolff, and lots of interesting excerpts being passed around from the book. What did this one just reminded me of? I can't recall exactly what reaction it was, but there were a couple of them, and I don't know if we'll get to all of these things today, but we'll have to organize the thoughts and bring out some of the other excerpts that have been circulated, I think, are particularly revealing. Let's see. There was, you know what? Before we get to the story, and we may not get to the story, may have to just let you read James Fallows on your own, because it's, I don't know that it's as revealing or newsworthy as some of these other things here, but you should read how actual smart people talk about themselves, although I suspect you already know how they talk about themselves. You're all pretty smart people. I wanted to get back to a story that I referred to earlier in the show and didn't get the actual hard news reporting on the record for. Something particularly horrible that happened over the end of last week and into the weekend in reaction to the book. Republican senators, it wasn't even a reaction to the book. This is, well, you know what? This is part and parcel of reaction to the book. There was this reaction to the book where Republicans, for taking the lead from Donald Trump himself, saying we need to loosen libel laws and make it essentially easier for the president or anybody else to sue book authors and publishers over insulting books or books that make them look bad. In other words, to either, as he was trying to do, prevent its publication, which was useless, or to sue for damages if they think the book is somehow libelous, and something that really Trump has never been able to get away with on a personal level, but most people don't get away with, generally speaking, here in the United States, except in the most egregious cases. And Trump has often said during the campaign he wanted libel laws that were a little looser, that were perhaps a little bit more like they are, I have heard tell, in the UK, where people sometimes more frequently are able to win judgment on such questions. In the United States, it's relatively rare. It has to be truly egregious and malicious and without any basis whatsoever. And I don't really know what the legal standard is in the UK, but it's something that he sort of casually threatened during the campaign. We now have members of Congress saying, yes, we're the ones who are in charge of doing something like that, and maybe we should loosen up the libel laws. Maybe we should make stricter, we should actually outline legal penalties for saying bad things about the president. I'm sure what the subtext there is, so long as the president is a Republican, or in particular this Republican. I don't know how far they want to extend this stuff. Side note to that, as terrible as that is, we also have a very similar effort. And Armando has sent me another story too. Is this related to the one I'm talking about, or let's see. This is a Trump-Russia thing. Okay, well, but let me set that aside for the moment and get to this story. A related, I would say, issue to the libel one. Republican senators raise possible charges against author of Trump dossier. This one I don't think is going anywhere, but also just equally dangerous in theory here. This is a New York Times report Nicholas Fandos, Matthew Rosenberg put together on the 5th, end of last week. More than a year after Republican leaders promised to investigate Russian interference in the presidential election, two influential Republicans on Friday made the first known congressional criminal referral in connection with the meddling. And guess who is the target of this one? Against one of the people who sought to expose it. Chuck Grassley, who is the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who you know very well, a senior committee member, told the Justice Department they had reason to believe that former British spy Christopher Steele lied to federal authorities about his contacts with reporters regarding information in a dossier, just some dossier. And they urged the department to investigate. The committee is running one of 3 congressional investigations into Russian election meddling, and its inquiry has come to focus in part on Mr. Steele's explosive dossier that purported to detail Russia's interference in the Trump campaign's complicity in it. The decision by Grassley and Graham to single out the former intelligence officer behind the dossier infuriated Democrats and raised the stakes in the growing partisan battle over the investigations into Mr. Trump, his campaign team, and Russia. The Senate Judiciary Committee effort played into a far broader campaign waged by conservatives to cast doubt on the Trump-Russia investigations and instead turn the veracity of the dossier and the credibility of its promulgators into the central issue, which it isn't. in case you didn't know. At the same time, President Trump and his allies have demanded that the Justice Department reopen its investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server and the Clinton Foundation. You know about that, I'm sure, by now. FBI agents have begun interviewing people connected to the foundation about whether any donations were made in exchange for political favors while Mrs. Clinton was Secretary of State, which you may remember is quite some time ago. Beyond the Senate Judiciary Committee, Representative Devin Nunes of California, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, has also been pressing to train focus of its Russia investigation on the dossier, which all of last week, of course, was undermined as in terms of the claim that it was the catalyst that set the FBI's initial investigation in motion. It was not. This week, Nunes appeared to finally secure access to FBI documents and witnesses that he views as crucial to unraveling what the Bureau did with the dossier, though it doesn't actually matter. And he has aggressively pursued Fusion GPS, the research firm that hired Mr. Steele. The committee, for instance, has issued only a single subpoena in its investigation for bank records, those of Fusion GPS. Not interested in Deutsche Bank? No, nothing, huh? More than a year ago, Republican leaders in Congress agreed that committees in the House and Senate would investigate Russia's efforts to influence the outcome of the election. Graham declared in December of 2016, the first thing we want to establish is, did the Russians hack into our political system? Then you work outward from there. Since then, the spirit of bipartisanship has frayed. At this point, only the Senate Intelligence Committee appears to be pursuing an investigation with bipartisan support, but Grassley said he only did what he had to do, I guess, in issuing this letter. I'm going to stop with that story since it's one you are already likely aware of, but I just wanted to sort of make sure we got that one on the record. Let's see, what was Armando talking about here? What about this, and what can Dems do, if anything? Let's take a look at this opinion piece in the Washington Post. Oh, Greg Sargent, Plub Line. It says, it's time for Democrats to take this drastic step on Trump and Russia. All right, let's see what drastic step it is. It's issued this morning, just middle of the show, 10:08 a.m., so catching up on breaking news. What does he have for us from the Morning Plum? The escalating campaign by President Trump's allies to discredit the ongoing Russia investigation is based partly on the idea that the probe itself is an illegitimate abuse of power. Okay, some Republicans in Congress are all in on this alt narrative and are going to great lengths to employ Congress's investigative machinery to bolster it, plainly in hopes of keeping the real truth about Trump and Russia from coming out. But Democrats can make it harder for Republicans to get away with this. Democrats need to ensure that the transcripts of testimony delivered to Congress by the co-founders of the firm that commissioned the so-called Steele dossier are made public. Hardball procedural tactics toward this end do exist. A Democratic senator can try to make the transcripts public by reading them into the congressional record on the floor. All right, well, that's nothing new there. Certainly something they can do, and speech and debate clause would cover any worries about prosecution for sharing that record. I've been wondering why. I mean, I suppose committees control the conditions under which the testimony is offered, but I'd be curious to know the basis on which a committee would, for instance, deny a witness the right to record his own testimony. And I suppose, I mean, it's entirely possible, and I suppose there'd be an analogy to the court system here, and like there's only one official record of what's going on here, and it's kept by the court, and I suppose the committee could make the same claim. But it would be an interesting thing to do, because you could do it on C-SPAN if you're being covered on C-SPAN. But if you're not, then I guess if you are being covered on C-SPAN, then you don't have to worry about it because the recording is being made, and there would be very little claim that the committee could have to a necessity for keeping your testimony secret. But still, I'm wondering why people aren't, recording it themselves, even surreptitiously, because it seems to be a recurring pattern that senators or congressmen come out of these hearings claiming that witnesses said XYZ, and witnesses saying that's not at all what I said. But okay, certainly If absent that, yes, any member of Congress who has access to the transcript, and that's a big question mark all by itself, but committee members could read the transcript into the record on the floor and be protected from any prosecution for it. That's legitimately out there. This morning, 2 Democratic senators on the Judiciary Committee, Greg continues, Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, sent a letter to Republican Committee Chair Grassley demanding the release of the transcripts. A Democratic leadership aide tells me that if the Republican majority refuses, Democrats will escalate calls for the transcripts release in coming days. That won't do too much, but you can escalate calls. That doesn't help, but it's a thing to do to create a record. The narrative that Trump's allies are spinning holds that the genesis of the narrative that Trump's allies are spinning holds that the genesis of the original FBI probe into Russian sabotage of our election and the Trump campaign's possible collusion with it, which became Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe, originated with the Steele dossier, which details links between Trump and Russia, but has lots of uncorroborated information, like the P tape, which we should talk about. This is supposed to show that the probe itself is compromised or illegitimate because at one point Fusion GPS, the firm behind the dossier, was retained by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Thus, the probe is rooted in partisan dirty tricks, and because the dossier is based on info from Russian sources, this means, presto, as he says in parentheses, Hillary Clinton is the one who actually colluded with Russia. Now, the narrative took a major blow last week when 2 co-founders of Fusion GPS published a New York Times op-ed detailing their own testimony to Congress on these matters. They said they told Congress, mainly the Judiciary Committee, that the original funding for their research was a conservative publication, that they don't believe the dossier triggered the probe, and of course we found out from elsewhere that others say it did not, and that their sources told them that the FBI took the dossier seriously because it corroborated reports of collusion coming in from many other sources, something that has been confirmed by deep investigative reporting. Crucially, the 2 Fusion GPS co-founders called on the committee to release the transcripts of their testimony, arguing that it would show that Republicans know full well that those reports of collusion were pouring in from independent sources, i.e., that the alt narrative is nonsense. In their letter to Grassley, Blumenthal and Whitehouse reiterate that the Judiciary Committee's probe has gathered info confirming the Fusion GPS co-founders' claims and call for the release of the transcripts. But Grassley is directing his investigative zeal in another direction. On Friday, he called on the Justice Department to investigate whether Christopher Steele lied to the FBI himself when interviewed about what he learned. Experts pointed out that this is bogus. The FBI would itself know if it had been lied to without Grassley's help. Regardless, as Blumenthal and Whitehouse point out in their letter, if Republicans wanted to keep focusing on Steele, they should release the transcripts because the American people should be allowed to decide for themselves. In other words, if Republicans want to spin this theory about the real genesis of the FBI probe, why should the American people be denied the facts that Republicans themselves have gathered via Fusion GPS's testimony about the real genesis of the FBI probe? Very interesting. A good point. Now on to the procedure. Sarah Binder, congressional scholar at George Washington University, tells me that if Republicans don't release the transcripts, Judiciary Committee Democrats can try to force the issue by getting recognized to speak on the floor and then reading the transcripts into the record. A Democratic senator, any senator really, once recognized, which depends on the parliamentary context in which the Senate is operating, yes, true, could hold the floor and launch into a discussion of the Fusion transcripts, Binder says. At that point, the GOP majority would probably block the move, but congressional expert Norm Ornstein tells me that Democrats could respond to that with more hardball by having other Democratic senators try to get recognized and pick up reading where the last one left off. This might fail too, but as Ornstein notes, if something like that happens, it's going to get an enormous amount of attention. That's how you make Republicans look like they're going to great lengths to cover up the truth. To be clear, we don't know whether Mueller will end up uncovering serious misconduct, but the point is that Republicans don't know what the truth is either, yet they are nonetheless working to prevent an accounting. This includes not just the criminal referral on Steele, but also, among other things, the bogus use of investigators' texts to, quote, prove the FBI is riddled with pro-Clinton bias. And House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes' use of his committee's probe to deflect accountability for Trump and further the claim that the FBI and the whole Russia stories genesis are compromised. If Republicans are going to take it to that level, then Democrats have every reason to make a big public deal out of the transcripts, Ornstein says. It would be better, of course, if Republicans agreed to release them, but if not, given that Republicans know Mueller might actually end up finding something deeply improper or even criminal or impeachable, yet are actively employing Congress's oversight machinery to delegitimize any such findings in advance, hardball tactics are more than justified. That's where we stand. There's not a great deal that they can do, although any senator can, of course, read that stuff into the record that can get a hold of those transcripts, and it's mostly judiciary members who would be able to have a legitimate claim on getting them. I don't know whether or not there are rules that would prevent the dissemination of the transcript outside of the Judiciary Committee, or for that matter, outside of the Senate. That would mean to Democrats in the House. Certainly they would be protected by the same clause should they read the transcript into the record in the House or try to submit it for the record in the House. And that's an easy trick too, right? And at some point, one or another senators or members of the House could say that I have some written material about something either related or even totally unrelated that I'd like submitted for the record by unanimous consent. And they still, to the extent that they still allow things to happen by unanimous consent, inserting material into the records is one of the ones that usually slips by. Insert the transcripts. You'll make people mad, but they'll be public. But there's not a great deal that Republicans can do to prevent Democrats from using their debate time on the Senate floor, no matter what they're debating, to read those transcripts. If you are recognized to speak on a tax bill, but in the Senate choose to use your time reading those transcripts, there's not that much that Republicans, under the rules, can do to cut you off and stop you at that point. So long as if there's a unanimous consent agreement with regard to the amount of time you've been granted, then the time controls. But otherwise, no. You can just go ahead and read the things, and whether it counts as a filibuster or not, just spending time entering the transcript into the record in a protected way, it is possible to do. And I'm certain that there are pockets of time in the debate of any bill or nomination, for that matter, if you want to spend your time reading transcripts instead of discussing the issue at hand. And that's going to be tough for members of the Senate or House, for that matter, to do. You want to have, you got to get on the record on various subjects. But if you're determined to get these transcripts on the record, you absolutely can do that. I guess that's sort of the answer to the question of what, if anything, can Democrats do here. Running out of time, of course, once again, for the other stories that I have collected for you. But let's see. There's lots more that we should catch up on with respect to, let's see. There's good stuff on Trump and his television watching, as we learned today. Of course, his schedule being rejiggered such that to reflect the reality that he very often doesn't leave the residence section of the White House until about 11 a.m., which is coming up. He's staying in and listening to the show is what's happening. But they're blocking this time out as executive time. That's the euphemism that Trump has carried over from his private business days, to the extent he had to have a schedule at all. If he ever had to justify anything to anybody, he'd just say, I need more executive time. What is executive time? Well, to somebody like him, it's, I'm an executive and I get to use my time any way I want. For him, in practice right now, that's watching television on the couch in the residence and live tweeting, anger tweeting about what he sees on TV. I don't know that he's been doing it this morning. I think he feels like the spotlight is on him, and everybody found out that from now on, from 9 to 11 in the morning, he would be anger tweeting from the couch in the residence, and he got embarrassed for whatever reason, and he hasn't gone and done it. So, all right, well, no surprise there, I guess, except for the fact that that he didn't take advantage of it. He would be embarrassed about anything, I guess, is the news here. All right, let's see. A few more issues that we might perhaps toss out there. There's some renewed attention to the domestic emoluments problems surrounding the D.C. hotel, although in this case they are emoluments problems for Ivanka in addition to Donald Trump. People pointing out that Ivanka Trump herself owns a significant chunk of the Trump hotel, and she too is a government employee, a government officer, a White House advisor with a supposedly real job, though not much of a supposedly real salary, and she owns a significant percentage, and she's been hosting parties and attending parties at the hotel, pocketing part of the profits while a government employee, which is, of course, explicitly prohibited by the lease, but they're not sure. Remember the stupid interpretation that the GSA gave it? Well, we don't really know whether the president counts as a government employee or a government officer because of his super special position, which doesn't make any sense, but is the sort of thing that Trump supporters and Trump himself sort of believe inherently. I don't think that they quite understand that the president isn't a superpower unto himself. They just have this myth from watching TV and movies that the president can do whatever he wants, essentially. So they believe that maybe he's not. Maybe he's a special case. Certainly, top White House advisors aren't special cases. And you could very easily begin to unravel this whole thing by just looking at Ivanka herself and no one else. But then, of course, eventually, in order to give any meaning to the emoluments, domestic emoluments clause at all, you'd eventually have to look at the fact that the president owns this place and that all you have to do to bribe him is book a party at that hotel. That's really literally all there is to it. Okay, let's see. Other things that might be squeezed into 2 minutes or so before we wind things up. Yeah, probably not a whole lot here. But anyway, Walter Schaub was the latest to write on this weird issue. But also he had another piece here. He had the... I guess the actual code involved here, a short tweet thread that we might be able to squeeze in here. 18 U.S. Code Section 208 makes it a crime for federal employees to participate in a particular matter in which he or she has a financial interest. An investigation is a particular matter. A subject of an investigation has a financial interest in the investigation. The subjects of any investigation of the Trump campaign's communications with Russian officials potentially include any member of the campaign who communicated with Russian officials in 2016. This particular bit about Jeff Sessions, who was, of course, a member of the Trump campaign. He communicated with Russian officials in 2016. He didn't reveal this in his testimony. Thus, Sessions was a potential subject of an investigation and at a minimum could certainly expect to be a witness. Therefore, Jeff Sessions' recusal was mandatory, pressuring him to participate as a government employee. Therefore, in the investigation amounts to pressuring him to commit a crime. Wow. Another reason why the Trump campaign and Trump himself, the Trump White House, and everybody who reportedly leaned on him not to recuse himself and to instead hang around at the investigation and try to exonerate the president personally or quash the investigation personally may themselves be guilty of yet another crime, a violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 208, according, once again, to Walter Schaub, former director of the Office of Government Ethics, so he has some reason to know. All right, time to wrap things up and hand things over to Justice as he prepares to take you on for the rest of the morning here in, well, it's morning certainly on West Coast anyway, the last hour of the morning here on the East Coast with his programming. Let's see, where's my notes there? Okay, there we are. Starting off in the Bistro Cafe. It is fairly certain that 40 years from now, someone will say Oprah Winfrey's speech, we didn't really talk about that, at the Golden Globes inspired them to do great things. Well, there's always that. She doesn't have to run for president for that to be true, right? Then on with the rest of the menu. Companies that announced big bonuses. What do you know? After the GOP tax cut are now laying off workers by the hundreds. More detail on that. Kushner Real Estate Company under investigation by the SEC, as it should be. And the real reason the Mercers have cut ties with Steve Bannon has nothing to do with Wolf's book and everything to do with Bannon's proposed tax hike on millionaires. Whatever happened to that?
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, after Justice's break, they'll move on to the chef's table to analyze insider warnings that Silicon Valley is eating your soul. Oh my. And an unmanned Chinese space station is set to crash in March with a highly corrosive toxin aboard. All that and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam next.